Thank you for joining us for our September Arkansas Valley Audubon Society program. I'm Megan Wilbar, Museum Coordinator for the InfoZone Museum at the Rawlings Library. Although our presenter Keith Bruno isn't joining us live this evening, you may remember him from our April program, How Birds Fly. Keith is a community naturalist for Audubon Rockies, where he runs ecology programs at the Hershey Foundation's 4 Mile Ranch, located near Pagosa Springs. He received a master's degree in natural resources with an environmental education certificate from the University of Idaho. We thank Keith for allowing us to share his Birding by Ear program with you tonight. Dr. Peg Rooney is joining us live this evening. She is president of the Arkansas Valley Audubon Society and the creator for this series of monthly programs. Thank you, Peg, for your continued efforts to bring us great content, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Sure. Thanks, Megan. I want to welcome you all here tonight and remind you that fall migration is underway. Millions of birds are flying over Colorado, mostly at night. And light pollution at night distracts and disorients the migrating birds. So Lights Out Colorado recommends that we simply turn off our porch lights and our outside lights at night to help birds safely migrate over Colorado. So turn off your porch light from now until the end of October to give our migrating birds a helping hand. And another way you can help birds is to join the Arkansas Valley Audubon Society. Membership information is on our website, Southern Colorado Birds, abbreviated SOCO, so socobirds.org. And now let's listen to the basics of birding by ear.
And tonight we're talking about bird song, bird songs, bird calls, birding by ear. And I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Keith Bruno. I'm a community naturalist with Audubon Rockies. I'm based down in Pagosa Springs, Colorado. And if you're not familiar where that is, about an hour east of Durango, Colorado. And the reason I started with a marsh was kind of a fun intro, because essentially right here in Pagosa Springs along the San Juan River, we have this wonderful river walk, and eBird has tallied something about 182 species and running that have been observed along the river walk downtown. One of which is the marsh wren, and I would say on average probably 98% of people walk by and don't pay attention or don't even notice that this little guy is there, right? But the moment that you do realize it's there, it's kind of a magical one. Not only is this bird really seemingly frustrated and vivacious and excited or excitable, and sometimes if nowhere to look, you can see them with some routine, because they've been nesting in some of the cattails in our geothermal infused wetlands for a number of years. And it's not only a cool thing to see them, a fleeting glance flying into the cattails, but it's actually more likely to hear them as you pass by, if you know what to look for or listen for, excuse me. So again, they are just a fun bird to get familiar with. And I wouldn't say it's an easy bird song, and so don't be intimidated. That's not how we're not gonna set the bar just with a marsh wren and then work from there. We're gonna actually take some steps back, because I too find a marsh wren call to be very difficult and very complicated. So but I do think by the end of the night you'll have a sense of distinguishing some of these different songs and as we investigate. So what's that sound high up in the trees? I just wanted to start with, really talking about, why do we bird with ear? Why is that important? Why is this a skill set that we should pursue? And outside of the obvious one that it enriches our soul, birds aren't always visible. So oftentimes, for example, in this photo in the bottom left, which is from a bird monitoring project locally, oftentimes we're doing point counts in the summer in the national forest near us, and we can't see some of these birds. A lot of times they're warblers, they're high up in the tree canopy. Sometimes even the flycatchers, are good at hiding in the oak brush. Vireos, as I've got here in the top right, a warbling vireo is kind of a classic example of that. They like to, move through kind of this 15 to 20 foot elevation off the ground range, and they hide in brush. And sometimes the only time you can detect them, or only way you can detect them, is using your ears. So it opens up a fuller experience of birding, and certainly for this project that I just described, it's critical for us to know to inventory what birds are actually present when we go out to do point counts. And all of this is to say we recognize that people learn bird songs differently. So we're going to spend a little time here at the beginning talking about some different tools and some different ways that people commit bird song to memory, because it doesn't work the same for everyone. I'm going to go ahead and play a warbling vireo song just because it's another very cool and intricate song. So don't get intimidated. Again, we're going to start with some easier birds and then work our way up. But I just wanted to play this one for you because it's one of my favorites. I like a lot of the vireo songs. Okay, that gives you a little bit of flavor. Rightfully named the warbling vireo, it seems to kind of have this kind of jittery quality to it. And it's always another exciting sighting when we see those guys out in the woods. So I understand that the biggest piece of this is that everybody kind of comes out with something different, and whatever ultimately works for you to remember a bird's song, whether it's just grabbing it's a certain portion of the song, whether it's the introduction of that song, or it's perhaps the tail end of that song, maybe a few notes in that kind of catch your ear, and you're like, oh.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Megan. Oh, Megan. Oh.
Thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to try to get the sound back on, so just give me a second and I'll try to do that.
A little bit, I can show you guys what this looks like. But essentially, if you can imagine that those solid blurbs are where you're going to hear the most intensity of sound. Now, if you're thinking about the same species, calls, oftentimes used to locate and communicate with mates. Contact calls, that's some common nomenclature. Where are you at, Susie? I'm right over here, Fred. It's there's obviously turn it into something human, but essentially there is a discourse back and forth, trying to check where's your mate, or maybe where you're maybe even when you see a mixed flock with a lot of juvenile red-winged blackbirds, there's there's a lot of communication. Hey, should we leave now? Is there a predator? Should we be nervous and scared? There's a lot that's kind of being shared and communicated. And so I'll play a few, and typically these are gonna be less notes, right? So this first one I'm gonna play is more of kind of that chit that you would expect from not only a female, but males and juvenile males especially. Let's see, whoop, let me go back. Okay, and then the second one that I've listed is kind of more of a, I think my daughter described it as like sounding like a rocket takeoff, more like a, and well, not that, that's the actual song, but they coming on. Some of the chick calls. Somebody's chicken in the background. There we go. Yeah, right there. That's it's a really fast, intense vocalization. And you can see below again in these sonographs, these kind of shorter but intense bursts of intensity. And so those are what I've actually been hearing a lot of too, is these single note communications right now, as everyone's kind of settling into their respective breeding grounds, etc. So a lot of communication going on right now. All right, so when you're describing a song, it's both technical and non-technical. So I tried to give you guys a little bit of the technical right here, because it is helpful, because you can quickly find yourself, trying to describe a song and not making a whole lot of sense, or being very repetitive with what you're saying. So, a couple of things that you want to think about are the tempo. So how fast is it? We think about a house wren. We'll listen to house wren later. It's really rapid fire, kind of bubbling is one of the adjectives I hear a lot with house wrens. Bubbling, it's really kind of quickly moving. Or is it slow and labored, maybe like a mourning dove, really drawn out, and there's a pause. Is it steady or variable? Yellow warbler, like we listened earlier, that sweet, 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 sweeter than sweet. There's kind of that steady quality to it. Or is it variable? You think about a Western tanager, there's a lot of kind of ascending, descending, and then there's pauses, and then it does it again, and sometimes there's not as much method. So that can be, that's another way to describe it, is it varies. So steady or variable. The pitch, is it high? A brown creeper, for those who know a brown creeper song, it's more of a call than a song really, but a really high-pitched single note. And sometimes a lot of people can't hear those frequencies because it's way up there. I even struggle to sometimes. Or is the pitch low, like an American crow, that kind of more throaty, garbled lower frequency. Is it repetitive or not? You know, you think about a Pygmy Nut Hatch, which is kind of a peep, 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 really steady, right? It's steady and repetitive. It keeps repeating the same note. Or not. A Bullock's Oriole, for example, has a huge repertoire of songs. And sometimes you're like, is that even the same bird that was just singing? So, you know, a lot of times catches you off guard. So, you know, it really depends on whether it's repetitive or not. That can help you out. The tone, and this is kind of gets into some more of what I was trying to tease out of everybody with that activity to start off. You know, we're trying to kind of clarify the mood, the quality, or the character of it. You know, is it clear? I would argue that, you know, a red-winged blackbird has a really clear tone to it, even though it's maybe has a little complexity to it. It's really clear. It's not burry. It's not chewy. It's not you know, trilly, I would say. Is a metallic tinny. I added ethereal. That's one of my favorite words that I've kind of self-described, a hermit thrush, which has a long time been one of my very favorite forest birds. And it really, to me, has that ethereal quality. You know, it kind of disappears into the ether, and it's beautiful in that way. So on the right here, we've got a spotted towhee. You know, I think I tried to target species mostly throughout this whole talk that we would, you know, and knowing that we're all spread across a big region, that we would all find potentially in our environments. And spotted towhee is one that's just, you know, come back into our neighborhoods from points south in the last number of weeks. And I'm already hearing the Mew Calls, which let me play that for you guys. I think that's one that I grab onto early on. And you can see I've put a corresponding arrow down in the sonograph to. You might easily think that you know, could be a jay almost, or even a crow. You know, sometimes it has that quality to it. You know, it's, I would say it's a little bit burrier and chewier than say that red-winged blackbird that had a clearer tone, and perhaps a more metallic tone. Now the song, and this is the part with a spotted towhee that also will get your attention. You're likely to hear those Mew Calls for a longer period of time, I would say, than the actual song that I'm getting ready to play, which has what some guidebooks describe as a chup chup z. It's got two notes essentially that started out, and then this really rapid trill. And so, you know, they describe it right here as a chewy, and that's from Audubon. But listen to it and see what you remember. See if you can kind of pick out a piece of it. Now again, at this time of year, adult males are going to really move into high points to sing this trilly song. They're establishing mates. They're defending territories. If they've already established their territory, they're running off other prospect males who are coming in and invading their territory. So it's really, you know, if you read into it a little bit more, there's just a lot going on. And it's exciting to kind of venture into that world. Now, as we keep going further, I wanted to, I was, you know, when I was putting this presentation together, I was trying to think, what's the best way, knowing that we are all spread across a big region, what's the best way, you know, to kind of showcase birds from some of these different areas that we may all live in, you know, realizing I live in, you know, essentially at the edge of a big ponderosa pine dominant forest, mixed conifer. If you get on the north slopes, you'll see a lot of Doug fir. Obviously, if you go up in elevation, that changes, and that's the case for all of us. but where I live specifically, it's kind of a big meadow system with mature scrub or gamble oak. And I realize that there's people on this call who live, maybe out either in the desert or in the sagebrush country or out in agricultural open habitat fields, oak savanna. That would be more where I live. Or forest, more of mixed conifer, pinyon juniper. Up in the northern Rockies, lodgepole pine is dominant the way that ponderosa pine is dominant right here. Also, folks who might live close to waterways, I'm envious because that's always a great place to see and hear a lot of birds. So I've tried to use these icons and remember these. So we've got forest dwelling, open habitat, and riparian. And essentially, these are actually some just Audubon program logos, but I'm using them to kind of define the habitat of each bird. So when I come across these birds, you're not just like, where would I expect to find it? Hopefully that helps direct you. So I figured we'd start out. This is really kind of point A. Let's take a big breath and start with some, birds that I think we're pretty familiar with, a lot of us, and start picking through some of these. So I figured what better to start with than two of our favorite chickadee species that are winter residents for most of us in this area, and they stick with us all winter. So you gotta love chickadees. On the top, I've got a representation of the audio. The black-capped chickadee on the left. As to me, I've always heard their 3-note song as cheeseburger, cheeseburger. My daughter, of course, globbed onto that. Kids love that, and it actually helps. I think a lot of people help commit it to memory. But it may not sound like that to you. Some of the other descriptors include "Hi, sweetie," or simply you might just remember that sequence of notes in your head, that da 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 da. So black-capped chickadee, right? Now you add one more little short note on the front end of that, and you're probably hearing a different species, being the mountain chickadee on the right. And so, I like to kind of add just to keep it fun, but also it helps me remember there's almost this little stutter at the beginning. Double cheeseburger, or hey, you sweetie. Hey, you sweetie. So you can see that actually up in the upper sonograph. Again, let me see if I can annotate, and that might help. There we go. Okay, so if you can see this right at the beginning of that is kind of that double note I'm talking about. Let me see, I've got something in my way here. Oops. Stop, annotate, move that. Yeah, and essentially, you can see that there's an extra note than you can see on the left. So the black-capped chickadee doesn't have that additional note at the beginning, but the mountain chickadee does. So that's a good way to just distinguish those two species if you can't see them, right? Because sometimes these guys can be up high in the tree canopy and you may not see them. Now, when you get beyond that 3-note or 4-note song, it gets a little more challenging. Those kind of more Phoebe notes that, or chickadee-dee-dee. And with both cases, really, both those species are going to use escalating additions of D onto chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee to essentially, respond to some threat or send an alarm to another of its group. These guys work in flocks a lot and in mixed flocks with other birds, and sometimes they'll communicate with other species. So let's listen to the black-cap first, just so you guys can kind of. Good. Now, and the mountain chickadee for comparison for the song. Da, da, da. A subtle difference. just a subtle difference can make the difference in knowing the difference between those two. So yeah, I thought that was kind of a fun one to start with. Let's go ahead on to another. So I started out with, again, let me go back really quick. So you can see I put the forest habitat icon, forest dwelling, in the very top. Both these species are really inhabitants of conifer, mixed conifer, and deciduous forests. And they'll move into semi-open habitat as well. But they tend to not stray too far out into wide open expanses. They prefer to have tree cover for insects. And let me move this annotation. Let's see here. Clear. Okay. Now, Western Meadowlark. A lot of the folks who live out in open spaces are familiar with this really robust and clear song. And to me, it's such an exciting moment when they show up in my neighborhood. And there is a pair that is actively working to build a nest out in the grass fields on my property. So that's exciting. And they're coming and going, and every afternoon as the sun sets, listening to these guys is one of my favorite things. And I think a lot of us could probably agree on that. So remember, volume is a big one with these guys. I've heard people talk about driving down the highway and all of a sudden they hear a meadowlark perched on a fence post and they whoa, it's like their head swings around, or they come to an abrupt stop to see what it was. But remember, there's kind of like this little 2-note intro, and then you get into these huge, big pitch changes, right? Big pitch sweeps and descending notes at the very end. Oops. Here's a bird establishing and defending its territory. It may sound harmless to us, but it's saying, "Hey, this is my space. Back off." Yeah, it's a beautiful song. Now, meadowlarks are a blackbird, so you think about the red-winged blackbird. It has some of those same properties, really clear. Some people like to say metallic almost, or even tinny. Those are some common adjectives that describe the tone of the song. Now, in terms of some of the behavior, the short contact calls, and maybe some more of these kind of notes that you might hear in flight. I'm going to play another one down there. Yeah, it's amidst some of the singing in there, you could hear these kind of single note call notes. I don't know if I would agree that they're always whistles and warbles. Some of this language on the right, whistles and warbles, I think that may have been pulled from Audubon, but essentially these single note, kind of similar to some of those single note calls that we were hearing from the red-winged blackbird, but essentially, communicating with a mate at that point, likely. And sometimes they'll do these flight songs as they are, protecting and defending their nest sites. Now, I put these two up side by side, both finch species, but pretty diff. Well, actually, a female house finch could be certainly confused with the pine siskin. We're looking at a male house finch right here, but a female is brown and white, streaky, very similar to a pine siskin, actually. A little bit bigger bodied. Pine siskins are a bit small. And remember, pine siskins have this really sharp, narrow bill versus that little bit more conical, sizable, notable bill on a house finch. That's why you can imagine pine siskins love to eat Niger thistle seed versus a house finch might prefer to eat a sunflower seed. So their bills are obviously they match their food sources. But I asked my daughter this morning, I played both of these two sound bites and asked her to kind of describe what she got out of them. And she said the house finch sounded like an alarm that someone had set on their phone. And then it's really squeaky, is what I would say, so anyhow, that's how she heard it, right? The pine siskin she described as taking a piece of paper and ripping it with increasing vigor as you're going through it. So I thought that was actually an excellent descriptor. So let's first listen to this house finch. And I've been hearing and seeing these at my feeders a lot. And so, it's one we take for granted. House finches are beautiful and they're fairly ubiquitous through the West, but you see one of these males show up and it is just almost an exotic red. And it's a very squeaky and slightly erratic and repetitive. Well, I guess I would say it's more, let's listen to it and we'll see what we think. Well, it can come across as a little bit more repetitive, but it also can lose its pattern sometimes. If you've ever seen those little bird song toys that are not, toys, that they make, Audubon actually produces one. To me, it sounds like a house finch. You twist this little metal piece inside of a box, and it has that property to my ear. And you can really see that kind of up down, that really kind of like that warbling vireo at the very beginning, has that similar property to it. Now the pine siskin is very different. Pine siskins will roll in big numbers, right? And I haven't seen them in big numbers yet. And there is some concern right now about salmonella spread. And so if you are seeing pine siskins at your feeders, you're likely seeing a lot of them as they move in big flocks. And if you are, then you might consider taking your feeders down for now. Make sure you're cleaning your feeders properly, because these pine siskins because they move in such big numbers, they're a big vector for salmonella. So, but let's listen to their song. And I really relish when they come around, because it's a beautiful, beautiful song. You can hear that rapid takeoff, and I've indicated that with an arrow on the spectrograph down below. You can really see the trajectory of those notes as they gain more intensity on the scale. So to me, that's one that's fairly easy now to remember. I hear that really buzzy, trilly acceleration, and it's routine. So hopefully that helps you remember that one. Now, Pygmy Nut Hatch. Here's, in my opinion, one of the kind of easier but also more recognizable and iconic calls that you would expect to hear in the ponderosa pine forest or mixed conifer forest. And you got to love Pygmy Nut Hatches. They're really small. They also move in groups typically. They actually they tend to co-rear or co-parent. And so they work as a team. I really love that about them. Versus the white-breasted and the red-breasted nuthatch, which I adore also. They're very cool, but they are a little bit more, tend to be kind of more in pairs or isolated. Pygmies are a little bit more of a culture bird. They want to be together and or in mixed flocks with other species. Now, that peep, 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 peep I was referring to earlier, you can really see clearly on that on that that sonograph on the top right. It's quite recognizable. I'll play it for you while you look at it. Now remember, these guys, all the nuthatches, they don't have a huge pitch range. There's not a big range to their notes are contained within a smaller frame if you're looking across in a horizon on those sonographs. So that stands for all the nuthatches. Now, if these guys are actively nesting, then sometimes you won't hear as much peeping, and they're kind of tending to other things, and so you might just be hearing simple notes, or you might hear them drumming. Sometimes drumming doesn't necessarily mean a woodpecker. Oftentimes it means a nuthatch, right? So they're drilling on trees, trying to find insects as well. Whoops. And so just remember that sometimes that drum to it and see what's actually there, because it may not be a hairy woodpecker, it may not be a downy woodpecker, it may be a pygmy or a number of pygmy nuthatches. Great. Okay, now on to the white-breasted nuthatch and the red-breasted nuthatch. Remember, the white-breasted is almost all white underneath. It gets a little bit buffy on the sides of the flanks. They can have a little bit of that rusty brown on the underside of their flanks. But typically their chest, their breast, and their chin is really white all through the eye. And then if they're actually coming down a tree, which is kind of characteristic of their behavior, they like to fly to the top of a tree and then spiral down that tree down to a low point, and then fly to another tree and then spiral down that tree. And it gives them a vantage to see insects inside of the tree bark. So what an amazing adaptation is their anatomy. They have that upturned bill, and as they go down that tree, their bill can probe directly into bark to find insects. Brilliant, right? So they have, and so if you're looking at them from above, that almost mohawk blue stripe on top of their head bisects really dominates their head and bisects the white on either side of their face. Versus the red-breasted nuthatch, which has that white supercilium, the white eyeline above the eye. Of course, a lot more red breast underneath, as per their name, and that dark navy on top. Both have that kind of slate blue to slate blue gray on their mantle, their scapulars, and through their wings. So they can easily be mistaken. But also look at their body shape, and the white-breasted nuthatch I typically think of as having kind of a longer extension of their bill, and their neck tends to kind of orient that way. But when a red-breasted's coming down a tree too, and it's probing also, it can look like a pygmy, or it also look like a white-breasted. So you just kind of pay attention to those field marks. Now, if you can't see them, then you got to rely on the song. So both of these guys, and this is a good drill for everyone out there. Don't be shy. I'm going to encourage everyone out there to grab their thumb and index finger and hold it, and now attempt to say yank, 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 yank. And then you start to find that pitch range of a nuthatch, right? And we're going to listen to some of these because they're not always easy to tell apart. I've been mistaken before on these, and I tend to think of the red-breasted nuthatch as having a harsher yank, 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 versus the white-breasted yank having a little bit softer, lighter sound. But if you're thinking of the tone, I think of it having a kind of a burrier, like almost like they've got a cotton ball in their throat as they're singing, right? So it's kind of got this texture to it. Now that's more like all of their vocalizations are just a shade away from one another. Now, at the very top, you can see that I put on the white-breasted side, I put more open habitat, but really both these guys, you could find them in dense conifer forest. Red-breasted nuthatches, that's a little bit more true to them. White-breasted nuthatch ventures, for example, out into my neighborhood where it's meadow system, it's grassland with oak savanna. But there's no hard lines, so these guys will share territory. You might even argue that a red-breasted is more nasal. Maybe they win. Maybe this is a competition and who has a more nasal yanking yank. So they are both. Another big piece to look at on the actual visual on top is evident in this vocalization is the repetitive nature of red-breasted nuthatch. They tend to kind of hold that steady note, as you can see up top for longer periods of time than a white-breasted nuthatch is. And I've noticed that in the field. It's not always clear cut, but typically, they can repeat it, these sequences 16 times a minute. So, that might be one thing that you grab onto is that red-breasted nuthatch might be a little more persistent in those vocalizations, kind of like a pygmy, but obviously a different sound. The white-breasted nuthatch taking breaks from their actual nasal vocalizations. Now, a couple of woodpeckers I wanted to share with you guys. I think of the northern flicker as being a inhabitant of ponderosa pine and mixed conifer. However, they love to and they prefer to feed on ants oftentimes. So really these guys rely on ants as a huge food source for them. And so you'll see them coming down to the ground in the open areas. And I like to call them the cottontail of the sky because when they're flying, they have that white tuft on the top of their butt. And it's really evident, as also as is their beautiful, the red shafted, at least we have here, that beautiful orange that you get, or orange red when you see them in flight. And you can see obviously in their flight feathers, in their primaries, and in their tail feathers as well. So these guys, oftentimes you'll hear them distant in the woods, and what might get your attention is that loud, clear note. It's almost like it's kind of similar to a hairy woodpecker, but it's louder. So think bigger bird, right? Bigger woodpecker, louder sound. That's one way that helps me remember it. And it's kind of a call to attention. Single note calls, they're communicating with mates or young. Now, the other one that has a lot of volume is kind of this, as it's described up here by Audubon, is that wicka, 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 wicka. It builds in volume, and it has this, you can kind of actually see it. Let me see if I can annotate again over here with any success. You can see how it kind of stair steps right over here and stair steps right here. So that's building into that wicka, 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 wicka. Let's listen to it now. Let me stop annotating. And play this for you guys. In the background, you can also hear a hermit thrush. That ethereal song I was listening to earlier. right there, you can hear not only those single note clear calls, the contact calls, but also the wicka, 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 wicka. The hermit thrush is almost more dominant than the audio of the filter is. Okay, before I jump onto them, let me go ahead and clear this annotation. Now, you know, these guys are going to drum just like other woodpeckers, but I wanted you to remember that clear call, and we're going to go right to talking about hairy woodpeckers in a second. That's a hairy woodpecker. So for comparison, though you're looking at a northern flicker right here, I wanted to play a hairy woodpecker for give you a sense of scale. To me, it doesn't have as much volume, but it is very definitive. Again, you're in mixed conifer or a harbor, and a hairy woodpecker is a pretty ubiquitous bird across the United States, and one that we all love for that reason. And so remember that single call note is characteristic of a lot of the woodpeckers, but the flicker is a little bit louder and has a little bit more of that kind of ear quality to it, right? For lack of better explanation. Great. Okay. So side by side, hairy and downy woodpeckers, commonly somewhat commonly misidentified. Most folks have a pretty good sense of their size. The suet container gives you a good sense of scale, so I liked this picture a lot. The hairy on the left, bigger body, their bill. A lot of people like to say that a hairy's bill is, if you were to flip it backwards, it would be the width of their head, versus a downy woodpecker's bill. If you were to flip it, it would basically just go from the edge of the feathering to its eye. So way smaller bill, smaller bird. Otherwise, male and female markings are very similar. So, and their calls are quite similar. Sometimes you got to look twice, right, and make sure if you can see them, and if not, there's a hairy sounding really agitated. I love it when they do that. Really and then a downy over here for comparison. Also scolding, and both of them have this kind of descending rattle. So, sometimes you're going to have to look to confirm. But, I think my ears have gotten used to hearing a hairy enough to where those single call notes usually turn me on, or if I hear that really agitated sequence, I know what I'm hearing. Now, we've moved on to what I call the serious songsters. So we have, I think there's 5 slides here that I denoted as serious songsters. And the reason I did that is because they really are more complex songs. But they're also still very common. We think of a song sparrow, and these guys are inhabitants oftentimes in riparian corridors along water. But you can see them venture up into upland forest, and you can see them venture into, agricultural and open habitat areas if they have proximity to water and cover. Maybe one of just truly a beautiful song. I'm going to play it for you and see if, I think for me, it makes me think of rivers. And these guys will sing really year round. You can hear this song, actually. Sometimes it's not just locating mates, but it may have more intensity with that. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean that. Let me, I think when I went to annotate, just wanted to really quickly draw those 2 or 3 notes for everyone before they go into the deep trill. They start with those, sometimes it's 2 and sometimes it's 3 notes before they go into that deep trill. Now I'll go back to playing. little variation there at the end. But typically the way they start, it'll get your attention. It's loud, even being right beside a river tip a lot of times. But it has that, it's almost like they're winding themselves up with that 2 or 3 notes at the very beginning in order to then really belt out that trill that you see in that darker wedge that I indicated on the right there. But, you know, they're really adept singers for a small bird. Single call note. Remember, you're going to look for these guys. Oftentimes they're in willows, alders by the river, brush. There's your dogwood. Really work through an area that gives them shelter and protection, but also insect availability nearby rivers. Let's see. Let me clear the annotation there. So song sparrows, yeah, what a great songster. Hope you guys agree. Okay, next, let's see. Close that out. Now hit next. There we go. House wren. Okay, another one that is fairly ubiquitous, probably through the area that we all live. Again, I tried to kind of indicate that they kind of cross habitat boundaries. So you can find them, in open habitat areas. You can find them adjacent to water. You can find them in mature mixed conifer or deciduous forests as well. So these guys have this really excited, bubbling, gurgling are the adjectives that Audubon used to describe their exuberant song. And I would agree with that. It really has this kind of like, a lot of volume and a lot of excitement for a really small bird. So let's start by listening. So they change it up. They kind of mix it up a little bit more than the next bird. They have a pretty big repertoire. And it does seem like they really make a lot of trips down to the ground. Oftentimes maybe they go looking for these granddaddy long legs like you see in this picture. I love this picture, courtesy of Audubon, but what a great photo. And these guys really do, they'll forage a lot near the ground, but then they resume back to, or they retire back to their nesting sites, at least come late May, June, and into July. So let's see, listen to 1 or 2 more. And then one last one I'll play is kind of more of this kind of scolding notes, where they appear to be coming across this little frustrated. Probably enough birders. So yeah, house wren, great one. Small compact body and the classic wren tail. Sorry, I covered it up right here. But just like you saw in that marsh wren photo in the very first slide, it's they really have that upright tail that'll kind of pop up and down. Okay, so these next 4 birds need you guys to really pay attention because they are easy to confuse with one another. I'm going to start with the American robin because it's, to me, the iconic songster. They have this really beautiful, melodious ascending, descending quality to their song. And there are a couple other birds that have the same properties to their song. Some folks like to remember this as cheer up, cheerily, cheer up, cheerily. So it has kind of this up, down, up, down. You could see that in the sonograph on the bottom right. It's kind of got these, it goes up and then it goes back down and goes back up, goes back down. That was the first thing we had before. It really is a beautiful song. Now, in looking up some of the sound bites for American robins, you find, you really can hear that regionality of the same species in different regions, and the songs have different kind of character and quality to them. And so, I did my best when I was sourcing these audio bites to find them in, somewhere in the kind of Rockies corridor from New Mexico all the way up to Montana. But there are some that go out either as far into East Oregon. I tried not necessarily to pull songs from the East Coast, but and sometimes you can tell a difference, but sometimes you can't. So it really depends on the bird. But with these guys, remember, it's like ascending, descending, really melodious. It is a little bit erratic and, a little bit less method maybe sometimes, but they do still seem to follow a pretty normal pattern of, 5-ish, kind of series of up and down. But there is a lot of variation. So, they kind of will go into another, they'll pivot out of it, or they'll do that single call note after, almost like the pitcher, and so this next bird is going to get you guys a little frustrated because it's very close. And this is a bird, a friend of mine just told me today, she just saw a Western Tanager at her house today. So to me, that's one of the, iconic signs of, spring into summer, spring really, but these birds are, obviously a breath of fresh air, and they show up. They're beautiful, males and females. The males, of course, have the red on top, but the females are yellow and black. Beautiful birds, and almost exotic looking for a lot of us in points north in the Rockies. But again, as Audubon describes here, they have a robin-like fluty phrase, maybe a little bit more pause in between. And I do agree that the quality is a little bit hoarser, so it's not quite as clean and maybe as crisp. It maybe has a little bit more kind of a thicker tonality to it. And so I'll let you guys decide, but see if you can discern a few little, distinguishing pieces from it. Another one here for you. When you say this is representative, here. To me, that is has more pattern to it. You know, essentially you can even see in these two sequences that they show on the sonograph here, five essentially ups and downs, the series, and then it has that pitch trick, and it pauses, and then it has that pitch trick, and then it's a reset. But these guys have a little bit more, again, a little bit more thicker tone to their song. It's not quite as, you know, sing-songy as that robin. And again, the robin has a little bit more of a dawdling, like, what was I talking about? You know, quality to it, versus the Western Tanager is a little bit more like, I'm gonna tell you this, I'm gonna tell you that, I'm gonna tell you this, I'm gonna tell you that, I'm gonna tell you this, that, picture, you know, and so it's kind of has this pattern. So it's almost like they know where they're going with their song a little bit more, if that helps. And here, again, I'll play that little picture call right here. Yeah. Sometimes that's enough to get your attention right there. Realize that that's a Western Tanager. Again, these guys tend to stay high up in the canopy, especially come breeding season. Okay. Another one, just to further frustrate you and confuse you, the black-headed grosbeak, another bird that shows up this time of year. Now, some people like to describe their song as being more like a drunken robin. So it really dawdles, has maybe points of acceleration and excitement, but it kind of loses its, you know, it doesn't have much pattern. Spent a little bit too much time at the local pub, and they're just, you know, they just can't stop talking. So still has that beautiful melodious ascending, descending nature. So to me, again, remember, robins, you know, really, really beautiful, crisp, clear sound. However, they shake it up a little bit more often. They vary it. And sometimes they almost sound like they forget where they're going. Then the Western Tanager, remember, really more regimented with their sequences of up and down. And then they have that pause and then that picture. And then they begin again. Black-headed grosbeak, really a little less method. You can really see in that sonograph a lot of dawdling. I think that's a really good word for these guys. Now, one more. And I love vireos, and I had to play Plumius vireo because one of my favorite forest birds. And see what you think about this one too. It has what's described as a burry phrase, and I really do think these guys have a kind of a burry, husky tone to their song. See if you can pick that up. These guys to me really sound like they're asking themselves a question and answering it. Like it's really this call and respond sequence, and more so than the other ones. But they do have that rise and fall, that ascend and descend, just like those other guys do. And these guys are gonna be high up in the trees. So, but if that helps you remember, to me, I think all four of those have similar traits, but you can distinguish them through some of those pieces we looked at. Now. I think we've only got another 10 minutes or so, so I didn't want to take up too much more time. But, you know, of course, Stellar's jays really get your presence. They actually have incredible vocal series of arrangements. They really can make a lot of vocalizations. They can do some mimicking. This one may be the most common to get your attention. And then, of course, they do their hawk imitation, which can really throw you for a loop, thinking that you've got a red-tailed hawk there. Clever birds, jays are. Woodhouse's scrub jay, you know, a little bit less varied. I see a lot of these guys in my neighborhood, and a little bit more of a dweller of oak savanna into you know, mixed conifer and ponderosa pine, and down into pinyon juniper as well. Let's see if you can hear well now. There you go. That's to me that I associate kind of housey, not really a song. Yeah, Woodhouse's scrub jay. What I was saying is these guys live. I hear these guys a lot in my neighborhood because I live in Oak Savannah at the edge of the ponderosa pine, so they come and go a lot. And to me, their vocalizations are a little bit more simplistic. They don't have quite the quiver, so to speak, as Stellar Jay. So and certainly a little bit kind of softer, softer tones to their actual check notes. And I thought I'd throw in one warbler in here. We did talk about yellow warblers earlier, but you know, warblers have this kind of really sweet, soft nature to their songs. As you can see on that bottom right, that's actually a spectrogram, so it's got color to it. And just listen to this one. It almost has like this kind of soft continuum to it. But it's once you get into warblers, that's a whole nother bag for songs. Whoops. I've heard people describe it almost having kind of like a laser quality. It's kind of like this, you know, not as kind of, the yellow warbler had that more sweeter than sweet, you know, a little bit more kind of variation, whereas this one has a little bit more of a soft continuum to it. One more. These are just kind of more of their check notes. Play it one more, the song one more time. Whoop. Okay, great. And guys, that's it for the birds. I have more, but I think that's probably all we should try and bite off tonight. Here's a couple of resources. So take a screenshot of this, screenshot this. So essentially, I'm just talking about some of the tools that I use, the resources I use to go in and diagnostically work with these birds and to download some of these recordings. That third option you can see there is Xenocanto for sonographs. Excellent, right? There's people who go out all over the country and the world and have really sophisticated recording equipment, and they get these beautiful sound bites. And almost all of those came from Xenocanto. You know, Audubon and Cornell Lab of Ornithology both have great bird guides. They offer different strengths, and you know, they offer different facets. So I would say use both of them. I use both of them. They're both excellent. And Birdsong Hero number 4 is essentially a training program that you can hold yourself accountable if you really want to go and work through songs and be able to distinguish through different songs. There's essentially a series of quizzes and tests that you can do with audio quizzes. And you also get these great moving spectrograms that are really great. Birdsong Hero, look it up. That again is through All About Birds, which is Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And keep in touch. If you have any questions, feel free to write me an email. As you can see, my email is kbruno@audubon.org.